Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Video footage from Mercedes W14 shakedown at Silverstone yesterday has been released, and some people believe they've spotted porpoising again in this year's car. But is it the aerodynamic phenomenon, or was it just a bumpy track? That is for you guys to decide today. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Quickly, yesterday Alpine revealed their car to the amazement of everyone in the entire world. These are the two liveries they're going to run. The top one, the full pink livery, they're going to use for the first three races in Bahrain, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and Australia, Melbourne. And the livery at the bottom they're going to use for the rest of the season. That I don't really notice any difference between this bottom livery and what they had last year. I think it's marginally different. And look, the pink livery is ugly, but at least it's somewhat interesting. And I kind of wish they'd run that for the whole year, to be honest. But it looked like well, the Alpine of last year yet again. The more interesting part actually was that they announced Zinedine Zidane is going to be an official Alpine ambassador. So that was definitely the most entertaining moment of the entire launch. But let's talk Mercedes. Quickly on Hamilton's helmet, this is what it's going to look like. It is once again yellow, but with purple accents. So, you know, a couple of years ago he had the purple helmet, then last year he went back to the kind of full yellow helmet. He's now gone for the yellow with the purple, with some kind of like pride accents as well that you mentioned also. So pretty cool stuff. And honestly, look, it looks pretty good out of the car, but see this helmet in the car, how it kind of works with the black. It's a great combination that Hamilton's got going on for this year. Quick note as well on the car, just on the actual dimensions of it and what it might mean for the center of mass. Not really anything crazy to read into in terms of what this is going to do for performance, but it was noted and now has kind of been seen in this side by side that the W14 is slightly shorter than the W13, and also the cockpit has been moved a fair bit forward actually. The nose is now significantly shorter, about 230 millimeters ish forwards. The cockpit is moving, so well, the calculation that was done here should adjust the center of mass by, you know, just under 1%. Quite a significant number. Maybe they feel like that's going to help in some respect. I'm sure they do, otherwise they wouldn't have done it. And of course, Mercedes have also said that there are elements of this car, though, the W14 they launched with, that they are still going to change. Toto Wolff said that there's still elements right now in the wind tunnel that are different to what they've currently got on track. So every team has got a development path, but Mercedes are very clear that this car they've currently got is not going to be where they think they can be in, well, presumably a few months' time. Some footage as well, some images, let's say, of Hamilton and George Russell in the W14 on track at Silverstone yesterday. Not ideal conditions. It was wet. They were using these Pirelli wet rubber tyres, which I'm guessing are like the newer Pirelli tyres from this upcoming year, which is why they wanted to test them, because the conditions actually looked like they could really be intermediate conditions, but I guess they wanted to use the wet tyres. I don't know, people have been looking into the footage we're just going to share and say, oh, well, there was an oversteer moment here, he was understeering here, shows that the W14's bad. Obviously, you can't read too much into this. This is a car that was on the track with no real setup time. Obviously, the first time they were there with brand new rubber on, honestly, a circuit where the conditions didn't seem to fully match the rubber they were using on the car. And just some footage here of Toto Wolff watching the W14 in action on track yesterday. So we were expecting quite a lot of footage from this to come out. It now has done. We've got about 3 minutes worth of, well, stuff that we can see here in a second, but I'll kind of clip it down to what we really want to look at, which is, well, the actual images of the drivers on the track. Now, quickly on Andrew Chauvelin's kind of reaction to this, he says, we had a solid start to the program. Conditions weren't great for filming or running, but we've completed the permitted 100k without issues. Gave us a good assessment of their first impressions of the car, both the drivers did. So we'll see what those impressions might have been here in a second. And obviously Bahrain is a very different beast to the cold, wet Silverstone. So whether the porpoising issue, even if it has been exposed here in Silverstone, which I don't really think it has, whether that's the same thing in Bahrain, who really knows, because very different conditions. So this was spotted, and people were talking about this today from a brief clip of footage here. This is a 1 second long clip of Hamilton's head in the helmet bumping up and down a little bit. Now, of course, you know, we want to see the whole context of this to see if there's anything else going on, but you know, just because his head's bumping up and down doesn't necessarily mean that porpoising is back, but we'll see where this, well, full footage originated from. So there's about 50 seconds of real footage here. Kind of interesting, Russell's got the DRS open here in the wet conditions, but this is kind of the full extent that I wanted to show you guys. So it starts off about here. I'll put it on the big screen. So, you know, here's George Russell putting the helmet on and all that. He gets in the car and they do a few laps, of course. So probably about 16 laps or so each. And obviously everyone's going to look at his helmet. Is it moving up and down too much? Because we know that last year when the Mercedes especially got to higher speeds, that was when the porpoising phenomenon started to kick in. And it was very extreme in Baku and even in Bahrain at the start of the season. Silverstone, it wasn't so much of a big deal. And, you know, it also depends to an extent on how bumpy the track is. Because if the track is particularly bumpy, it can obviously heighten the phenomenon. This also to mention because Russell had a bit of a moment coming through this corner, and I know people have mentioned this. You see here he gets a bit of a slide and has to correct the oversteer he was getting, and you know, people are, oh, okay, the W14 is terrible, but as I say, right, I mean, this car is brand new. It's also on rubber that might not be perfect for the track. It's also wet conditions at the end of the day, so being hooked up in the wet conditions is always going to be challenging, and you know, the setup wasn't really there for the car regardless, in addition to the rubber maybe not being perfect for the service of the car, all this type of stuff. So yeah, Russell had his turn. Hamilton then went out on track shortly afterwards, and the conditions here seemed more intermediate to me rather than wet tyre conditions, which maybe is why they were, you know, they were having some issues in the corners, but even then it looked pretty hooked up. So this was the clip that we saw earlier, right, of Hamilton's head bombing up and down, and we can see the moment before it happened. So he comes out of this corner and going on to the back straight here, he clearly hits some sort of bump. I mean, it's around about this point here where his entire body goes down a little bit in the car, so there's clearly some sort of bump that he hits around about, if I can just kind of get the right moment here, he hits the bump around about this point there. You can kind of see him go up and go down a little bit, and then when this happens, just after this moment where he goes down, then his head bobs up and down a little bit, because presumably he hits a bump. And the reason why I don't really think this is porpoising is because as he's coming down the straight here, you'd usually see that last year, the porpoising phenomenon, it would start at kind of, well, getting to high speeds, and then when it got to maximum speeds, that's when it would be at its kind of maximum, you know, amplitude, let's say. Whereas in this case, he, I think, hits this bump, and then as he, well, kind of recovers from the bump, the porpoising effect or the bouncing effect kind of stops, even as he's getting to higher and higher speeds. So, you know, maybe that's indicative of it being bouncing as opposed to porpoising. But into your thoughts in the comments below. Obviously, everyone's going to look into every single tiny little element they can of this footage to try and determine whether there's, you know, anything more happening. But look, at the end of the day, it's a wet circuit. There's not too much to read into at the end of the day regardless. But it's cool to see the footage of the car on track, and this I thought was actually quite a nice footage here of Hamilton going around these couple of corners. I guess this is through, what, Club and Vale possibly towards the end of the lap here. And yeah, looked pretty hooked up around there given the wet conditions anyway. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Of course, Bahrain is the real test, only about a week or so's time until we're in Bahrain for that first test, and then 1 week after that we've got the Bahrain Grand Prix. So there isn't really much testing or preparation time at all. Mercedes will have learnt what they can from that 100 kilometers they did yesterday, and they say they've learnt rather a lot. Whether that's a good sign, whether that's a bad sign, because of course last year they said after every Grand Prix weekends they learnt an awful lot, but didn't necessarily mean their car was particularly good. So that's what we've got from Racing News 365 for now. Hamilton then afterwards was, of course, giving his thoughts to the team, what he thought, what he wanted to improve. The reaction seemed to be relatively positive, and Hamilton actually gave this reaction after the fact as well, saying, you know, great job to everyone back at the factory, you know how it is, most exciting period of time for everyone, and then goes on to say kind of immediate reactions to the state of the car. The 2023 season has started. Obviously, I think he said he was generally happy with the way the car felt, but the test, of course, in Bahrain is really where we start to see what might be happening here, and as you say, get a full understanding of what the car can do. Hamilton goes on to say the day has been smooth, got through a good program, we've come away with some useful findings, generally felt comfortable in the car and excited to get going in Bahrain. It's pretty interesting, right? I generally felt comfortable. Of course, those type of conditions aren't always going to be optimal regardless, but just saying he was generally comfortable, wasn't fully comfortable in the car all of the time, but you know, obviously that's a setup thing, could be a setup thing anyway, rather than the state of the car necessarily. And even George Russell comments and says it's great to get on track, cold and greasy out there today, the car ran smoothly. I know pre-season test will be the first real test of the car, nonetheless the feeling from within the car is so far so good. So whether any body language experts want to find the original footage of that and determine whether he's lying or telling the truth, who knows, but who really cares, because we're going to see regardless in Bahrain whether the car's actually significantly better. Hamilton says the testing and the shakedown was smooth they did there in Silverstone, and he also commented that they're set up for a much better 2023 than they had, of course, last year in 2022. Whether their car is going to be competitive at the start, that of course is the big question, because Hamilton says, look, the W13 had like two good features, one of which was the reliability that was pretty good, the other one was the long run pace that was strong relative to qualifying, so they want to keep that going, but of course everything else he says they basically want to change. But they have admitted, and I'll actually share this quote here from Total Wolff first, that the side pod concept will change, but you know, basically they're looking at further solutions to optimize their car further. And this is the thing with Mercedes, right? They're starting on the back foot with their development for the W14 compared to Ferrari and Red Bull. There were even rumors a couple of weeks ago that Mercedes kind of changed their mind or changed tack on a couple of things late in the development, therefore things have arrived later than maybe they expected. So, you know, because they're starting from a point of being behind, there's more distance to catch up, where Red Bull and Ferrari can stretch their advantage when Mercedes are constantly playing catch up. So I think they're being quite clear, and even Hamilton said that, you know, he's perfectly ready and the team is ready not to be the front runner at the start of the season if that indeed does come true. They experienced it last year. They're not expecting to be the front runner going into the upcoming season, and they've got other things in the works. Even Toto Wolff says, look, we've got something that looks different to the current side pods in the wind tunnel at the moment, so they've got upgrades coming down the line, as of course all teams have, but I think it's been quite clear to the Mercedes guys as to what the direction is going to be. Hamilton even mentioned that he knows they've got a program of development. There's certain things they're working to improve over time, and you know, maybe after a few races Mercedes can get there. If Mercedes are very competitive from race 1, that does set an interesting precedent, because there is a good chance on what we're hearing that they might be the team to improve the most over the first 10 races, and well, we'll see of course how the W14 turns out when it arrives in Bahrain, and we'll see if the porpoising remains there, because it doesn't really seem like it is there to me based on what we've seen so far, but of course others may well disagree with that assessment. Hamilton even kind of doubled down on his trying to improve as much as he can as a driver, saying he's done more sim running than he's ever done in the last 18 months, more time with engineers, more time going over data, constantly looking to see how he can evolve as a driver. But no matter how good the driver is, if the car isn't there, it's not going to matter too much at the end of the day. And just to mention these then, these are the 10 liveries that we'll have on the Formula 1 grids. Some of them are good. I think the Mercedes and the Ferrari are probably the best. Then the Williams is quite nice. The Alfa Romeo is also quite nice, but it might be difficult to tell it apart from the Ferrari at times, depending of course on their relative position on the grid, which might be quite distinct depending on how things go. But hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.